welcome. We are continuing our very interesting reading about Thomas Jefferson. Alright, let's get in on it. We're on page 120, towards the middle. Not, he thought, with Patty's health, as excruciating as it was, he made his choice. Jefferson loved his family, he loved Virginia, he loved his nascent nation. Raised in a tight-knit universe of kith and kin, accustomed to spending his hours reading in his father's first-floor library, singing on the banks of the Rivanna with his sister Jane, and learning to supervise his lands at his mother's side, he cherished his domestic world while being simultaneously drawn into politics. Bit of a Frodo situation, right? Leaving the Shire and taking up a cause. Yeah, taking up a fellowship, right? In the fall of 1776, he could not have both in France. He could in Virginia. He called the messenger. No cares for my own person, nor yet for my private affairs, would have induced one moment's hesitation to accept the charge. He wrote in a note to Hancock, "But circumstances very peculiar in the situation of my family, such as neither permit me to leave nor to carry it, compel me to ask leave to decline a service so honorable and at the same time so important to the American cause." Jefferson spent the period after the writing of the Declaration of Independence learning how to translate ideas about human nature into political action. That is quite an interesting undertaking, to translate ideas concerning human nature and then putting that into some type of political policy. That's not easy. Especially if you're not honest about human nature, right? And what it's capable of. Like the day of fasting and prayer resolution during the Stamp Act crisis, the Declaration had taught him the power of language and the art of leadership. The art of leadership and the power of language. Day of fasting and prayer. To protect a vision of what might be and to inspire people to share that vision was and is an essential element of statesmanship. That is very true, right? That's why if you really just have an uninspiring politician on your ticket, you're really setting yourself up for danger, right? Overly dreary like Amy Klobuchar, oh my gosh. Boring. It's just terrible. So too was the capacity to exert one's will in the legislative arena, convincing other politicians to enlist in a cause. See, trying to convince the other, but how many countries and how many times is it, instead of a convincing, bribe, right? So, okay, you have loose morals, here's some cash, just do it. When in an idealer sense, you would want them to be able to have an exchange and really change their mind, right? October 1776 marked the beginning of Jefferson's pursuit of a remarkable legislative agenda for liberty in Virginia. Alright, so he's trying to bring liberty to Virginia. With Patty and Williamsburg with him, he fought to transform the promise of the Declaration of Independence into reality in a series of bills in the new General Assembly. For him, politics was informed by philosophy. Exactly. Which is so hilarious. Countless political science majors will talk a big load of smack against studying philosophy, which is why I'm a double major of philosophy and political science, because I understand that the connection and the need to study both, right? It's quite fantastic. It's fascinating. If any staunch Republican, for example, says the Founding Fathers, and then they ridicule a philosophy major, right? If they're like, oh, you're basket weaving, you're like, don't you say you love the Founding Fathers, but you're trashing on me for studying philosophy, which is something one of the Founding Fathers, such as Jefferson, clearly showed and stated was valuable toward the art of politics. Something to learn from every book, right? But one could achieve the good only by putting philosophy into action. That is true. You can't just sit around with theories all day, right? Splitting hairs. To do so required the acquisition of power. He moved carefully in Williamsburg, first introducing bills in order to test the strength of the general pulse of reformation. So, testing the pulse of what could happen. Now, he's doing it in a positive sense, but remember, it can also be done in a negative sense, right? Where your government's like, let's just test to see how much they'll take. What's the pulse? Where are they at? Let's gauge their response. Satisfied that the lawmakers were in fact interested in a new order, Jefferson pressed on, but only after becoming sure of his ground. As a delegate to the General Assembly in Williamsburg, and through his consistent work among his fellow Virginians, cajoling and seeking to convince, Jefferson put himself in a position to effect genuine change, to make the world into something it had not been before. Well, he certainly did do that, didn't he? Taking on a monarchy is a difficult cause. Difficult indeed. Jefferson's first significant initiative in Williamsburg in the fall of 1776 was a strike against entail and primogeniture. Interesting. Against entail. Ancient conventions under which large landowners were compelled to pass their property to a single heir, creating, in Jefferson's word, a distinct set of families who, being privileged by law and the perpetuation of their wealth, were thus formed into a patrician order, distinguished by the splendor and luxury of their establishments. That's the hard thing, right? You got land, you want to pass it on, you can pass it on, and they can sell it if they want, right? Private property was very important back then. People really wanted it. It was something that you couldn't, get as easily in England. Jefferson had benefited from just this system, but believed the greater good demanded reform. No part of the legal code governing life in Virginia went unexamined. There were bills altering criminal justice by ending the harshest of punishments, including limiting the death penalty to murder and treason. Well, you had to end the death penalty to treason at that point, because what they were doing with their new desire of a new government was essentially treason, right? So of course they wanted to end it. For creating a system of general public education to broaden opportunities for many white Virginians, for speeding the naturalization of the foreign-born into citizens, Jefferson favored a 2-year residence requirement. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. 2 years is not too long. Public education opportunities. As he worked, Jefferson took note of a newcomer on the political scene, a young, diminutive man who had grown up near Orange, Virginia, about 30 miles northeast of Charlottesville. He was 25. Jefferson was 33. He was small. Jefferson was tall. He was assiduously understated. Jefferson was given to making grand pronouncements. It's funny. The newcomer, James Madison, was to become Thomas Jefferson's most trusted and invaluable counselor. Look at that. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson having a bond. 2 important friendships. Born in 1751 to tobacco-growing gentry, Madison had gone north to be educated at the College of New Jersey, later Princeton University. Quite intense and tireless, Madison acquired a habit of self-possession. A habit of self-possession, look at that, which placed at ready command the rich resources of his luminous and discriminating mind, and his extensive information, and rendered him the first of every assembly afterwards, of which he became a member. Jefferson recalled. Wow, the first of every assembly afterwards. When Madison became Jefferson's successor as President of the United States 3.5 decades later, the writer Washington Irving would describe him as but a withered little apple John. Why? In Madison's case, appearances were misleading. Despite his small stature, Madison possessed a powerful political personality. Powerful political personality. So he wasn't like a big old brawly, like I chopped down a cherry tree type of dude. Interesting. Very, very withered little apple. As Jefferson once observed, never wandering from his subject into vain declamation. Vain declamations, we are filled with that today. But pursuing it closely in language pure language, classical and copious, soothing always the feeling of his adversaries by civilities and softness of expression. Madison rose to national greatness, and through loyal and wise counsel, Madison was an invaluable architect of Jefferson's own career. Well, that's good to know he had an influence on his overall, you know, destiny. Habit of self possession, From tobacco growers.